Before we get too wild here, does anyone want to talk me out of this?
At first I was afraid, I was petrified. Kept thinking I could never live without you by my side. But then I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong. And I grew strong, and I learned how to get along. And so you're back from outer space.
This is Baldur's Gate 3, and there are many ways you can play this game to increase the challenge it already provides. What you are about to witness is the dumbest. This is a sausage, and I'm going to use it to beat the game. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sure, you'll be using sausage, but what about the game's powerful spells, numerous ranged options, and mythic melee weapons? Well, no. For this run, I'll be using food and food alone. To make it even more interesting, I'm also sticking to this theme when it comes to healing, so while I can drink potions to heal, I can't use any magical healing on myself. And lastly, while I can buff me and my allies to increase my damage when I'm using food, I can't use any debuffs on the enemies to make it easier. With the rules outlined, it's time for the food fight to begin.
You're Abe Froman,
That's right.
the Sausage King of Chicago.
Yeah, that's me.
When I spawned in on the Nautiloid to begin my immediate venture, I had no real opportunity to make any attacks. So, after sprinting past all the early combat, I got Shadowheart added to the party and made my way to the bridge, where I sprint past Commander Zulk and crashed the Nautiloid to get the party started. Unfortunately, now is the time where I realized how difficult this run was actually going to be. At this point, I still didn't have anything that I could use to make an actual attack, so this encounter against these intellect devourers that's supposed to be pretty easy proved to be challenging. Fortunately, I was eventually able to outrun them, and then the hunt was on. Up to this point, I was surprised how long it had taken me to find a single salami. I still couldn't even engage in combat. However, after hours of searching, I eventually arrived at the storeroom underneath the toll house near the end of Act 1. And it wasn't long after that, jackpot.
She's beautiful! She is beautiful, yeah!
Now, excited as I was to find a weapon I could actually use, I still had yet to confirm if this challenge run was even going to be possible. But before I could get out there and start testing it, I needed to swing by the Druid Grove to talk to Auntie Ethel to pick up that one last missing ingredient. In addition to grabbing as many strength potions as I could, I also made sure to hit up every vendor I could to dump off all the weapons, armor, and items I collected after searching what felt like almost every crate and barrel in Act 1. I also bought everyone out of whatever food I could find and topped it all off by picking up the Ring of Flinging, which is going to be super important for the near future. With my bags emptied, my pantry stocked, and my salami in hand, there was really only one thing left to do. Alright, but I do think we have enough supplies to conceivably try to fight something? And fight something I would. As a first test, I would try to take on the Bugbear Assassin at the very fringes of the Druid Grove one-on-one. And between a combination of Wrathful and Divine Smites, the potion of Hill Giant's Strength, and a little bit of luck, I would eventually prove the salami run was possible. How much damage was that? I had officially vanquished my first foe using meat only. But there was still a lot more to be done, and without a second salami to work with, my options were pretty limited. Fortunately, the ring I had just picked up would prove extremely useful after taking a short trip to make an important addition to the party. You see, Karlach not only excels at hitting things really hard, but as a barbarian, she also has the ability to follow the path of the Berserker, which grants access to Frenzied Throw, which, when combined with the Ring of Flinging, means all of the food that I had been hoarding thus far gave me a second, semi-reliable source of damage. With the party's damage effectively improved, I thought it was time to take on a slightly tougher challenge than a lone bugbear, and thought that the owlbear in a nearby cave would prove a good test for a step up in difficulty. Unfortunately, I was right. Our first foray into the cave suggested we did not belong there. However, I have a different plan of attack. You see, with only one person able to make attacks, and the only other damage coming from thrown food, I needed to shift my focus into finding more options for the party to really be effective in combat. And that's when I remembered. At the Goblin encampment, there is a whole treasure trove of gold, magic items, and, surprisingly, food. All I had to do was sneak behind Dror Razlin, avoid getting caught stealing, and there was a good shot that I'd find a salami there. However, I was wrong.
We got another. We have 2 salami. We have 2 salami.
I found 2.
Let's do this.
After literally tripling my potential damage output in one fell swoop, I thought the only thing that made sense was to immediately run back to take my revenge. Once we arrived at the cave, it was 100% all aggro sprint to see exactly what the new Salami Zerg Rush was capable of. As it turns out, Karlach is actually a natural at handling the meat. I then had Shadowheart distract the baby owlbear, which left Karlach and the Sausage King to move in close and dole out heavy damage. With 3 people now actively in the fight, it was only a matter of time. And without even taking much damage, we quickly emerged victorious. Knowing that I needed to level up a fair bit before moving on to Act 2, I thought it was about time to pick up Gale and finally add a 4th to the party. He'd have an extremely important role to play in this run, but at least for right now, he'd be playing support until he got a salami of his own. From there, the only thing I needed to do before heading to the Underdark was grind out some XP, and since I was still riding the high of beating the owlbear, no one was safe. I started by clearing out the gnoll infestation on the Risen Road and quickly realized I was ready for some bigger game. From there, it was on to the Goblin encampment to see if I could get an even bigger boost by eliminating a True Soul, where I eventually ran into Manthara and, well...
Tactical nuke incoming!
After clearing out a majority of the goblins inside the camp, I made my way into the courtyard to get rid of a bunch of goblins at once. And look, poison counts as something you can eat, so it counts as food. Deal with it.
Ultra kill.
Since I already had their numbers thinned out and I was planning on farming them for XP anyway, I ended up finishing off the rest of the enemies in the courtyard pretty quickly thereafter. As I was searching through the absolute mountain of boxes and bodies after the fight, I also came across a fun little surprise. And that makes 4. I ended up heading back to camp to trade out Gale for Astarion since it provided a small boost to strength, but very soon thereafter I was fighting my way back into the Goblin encampment to finish them off. Getting rid of Priestess Scud had sapped me of a lot of resources, but all things considered, it wasn't a particularly difficult fight. Now, all I had to do was find Dror Razlin and... No. Wait! Alright, you gonna miss? Miss? What? With the party fully armed with salami and a number of successful boss fights already behind me, I thought this was gonna be another cakewalk. Turns out this fight was a lot harder than I was expecting. They fucking just fried me on the ground? Dude, that is so grimy. This one fight has been so long because I've been dead 1,000 times. This feels bad. Is this serious right now? You son of a bitch! Well, that didn't go my way. But that's alright. I called the stream there and came back after a night's rest with a dedicated purpose to exact my revenge. After a few rounds in the fight... God damn it. Think about, like, if we get this done, though. That'll be the challenge run complete that nobody asked for, you know? So yeah. I drastically underestimated the difficulty of this encounter. Even still, I'm no stranger to punishment when it comes to these challenge runs, so after some tweaking of the approach and a little bit of luck, I was eventually able to take Dror Ragzlin down. Yes! Cleaning up the last of this encounter also bumped me up to level 4. So that was nice. After some quick housekeeping things to handle my inventory and progress some quests for more XP, my next step was to travel to the Blighted Village. Once I was there, I used the secret well passage to access the interim layer before the Underdark, and then me and the Salami squad took down the spider matriarch that was guarding the entry. A nice benefit of accessing the Underdark is that it also triggers withers to arrive at your camp, which meant that Astarion went from being a relatively useless addition, look at him die like a stupid idiot, to someone that was at least vaguely helpful. Now, I certainly could have gone with Lae'zel earlier on, but after talking the tieflings into running away, turns out you can't free Lae'zel using food alone. So, moving on. Now that I was in the Underdark, I just needed to complete the easy task of navigating to the Myconid colony. Note! As I was saying, I just needed to complete the easy task of navigating to the Myconid colony so I could refresh my stock of potions. I was finally getting close to being able to access Act 2, but before I could, there was still a couple dangerous fights standing between me and moving forward. No, not that one. Can we just fast forward? Yeah. Keep going. Try here. No, skip ahead more, please. Keep going, a little bit. Let's try that. No. One more. Okay. So, to get to Act 2, I'd first need to make it to Grimforge. And before I could get to Grimforge, I'd need a bow. Fortunately, there's a group of Dwergar that happen to have one nearby. The only issue is that there's a lot of them. I'm way under-leveled for this area, and the battle map has a lot of height variance that I can't really take advantage of with food as my only weapon. Even still, after a brutal and difficult fight, where Astarion does exactly what he does best, I was able to just eke out a win and move one step closer to the endgame. After being warmly welcomed into Grimforge, I was only one big encounter away from getting to Act 2. Before I actually took on the crowded forge with nearly twice as many Dwergar as the fight that had almost just killed me, I took a small detour to try and squeeze in some extra XP. I took on some oozes, which proved to be a super easy fight. I then tried my hand at the clutch of Marigons, which was harder, but also didn't prove enough to level me up or slow me down. And there was just one main encounter in this area left before trying to take on the big finish. So, I thought a quick fight against a few mimics might be an easy stroll across the threshold to level 5. While they weren't that difficult, it turns out mimics have a rather unique attack ability that I hadn't remembered from previous playthroughs. This was actually so subtle I hadn't even noticed it until chat pointed out what had happened. Wait, what? I did not get my weapon. Wait, what? What? With very little options to deal damage in the first place, this was, well... He ate my salami? I was worried the run was going to fall apart right here. That was a limited edition Goblin Camp exclusive. I am so bothered right now, I'm going to throw a whole chicken. Losing one salami was a setback, but I could still manage as long as the rest of the party remained armed. Well, fortunately, Karlach was still able to deal decent damage from throwing food, and Shadowheart and Astarion proved enough to see the fight to the end. All of my anxiety about the run being dead was also removed when I discovered that you actually get your weapons back after defeating the mimic, so that's right. Close call. Though I had emerged victorious, I still hadn't hit level 5 and didn't have access to a second attack for the big fight against Nier. While that put me in a really bad spot, I had an idea that I thought would help level the playing field. I think the issue that we run into is this fight has way too much volume for us to be able to effectively beat with salami. But I do have a plan. While I hadn't mentioned it up to this point, the plan was to use the smoke powder barrels I'd been collecting throughout the entirety of the run thus far. As long as it's in your inventory, these barrels can be placed anywhere you want as long as you have the strength to move them. So, I placed a few. It's at this point that I also realized none of the meat that I've been using for the challenge run had been cooked, and that just wouldn't do. So I pulled out the candle I had stashed away for no reason and gave my salami a little heat. That's when I noticed the incredible safety hazard these barrels pose, so in trying to be helpful, I thought I'd get rid of them.
My main goal is to blow up.
As it turns out, the local residents weren't particularly happy about my efforts to assist, and now the final fight against Nier and the Dwergar of Grimforge had begun. However, I had already been grinding this run for a long time, and maybe my brain was just fried, but I accidentally cast a firebolt on my first turn in combat. My last turn with Astarion, literally without thinking, I threw a firebolt. So, oops. After reloading and setting up for the fight again, my cleanup efforts went even better the second time around, and now the fight was truly on. With food only, of course. This fight was an absolute brawl, with tons of enemies and all of them hitting for tons of damage. It was an absolute grind from start to finish, but after a little bit of luck and some careful positioning, I had finally tackled the Grimforge. Big as this fight was, I still hadn't hit level 5.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
So, to squeeze out that last little bit of XP I'd need, I decided to swing back to Auntie Ethel for one last goodbye. Now, finally at level 5, the Salami Squad would have 2 attacks per turn instead of 1. Except for Gale. While I suppose I could have just left him at camp, he was still going to be super important to finishing this run. So I decided to make some adjustments that gave Gale a slight edge. After turning Gale into a barbarian and getting him outfitted with the best equipment we had available, Gale is excited to get out there and prove himself. It was on to Act 2. While I was getting very close to endgame, the Shadowlands of Act 2 provided some additional complications that made things even more difficult than anything I'd faced thus far. For starters, throughout the entirety of the Shadowlands, stepping into darkness would result in a damaging curse, which meant I had to have the whole party carrying torches at all times. And to make matters worse, with how underleveled I was, even common, mundane enemies in Act 2 were hitting me for nearly half of my overall health with a single attack. Add this all together, and the opening encounter against the Spectral Shadows proved to be rather challenging. This situation, vaguely less than ideal. It was definitely a difficult encounter, and almost resulted in me dying again. But ultimately, the additional attacks from my recent level up were enough to win the day, and then it was on to the last step before the finish. I quick swung by Last Light Inn to receive a blessing from Moonbay so I could navigate the area without having to worry about torches, dealt with the baddies that spawned immediately afterwards, and then began the careful and tedious process of navigating to Moonrise Towers. Now, for those of you who have played this game, you might be wondering how I'm planning on beating it within the next 3 minutes using food alone. You see, normally you'd have to advance to the final act, eliminate the dead 3, and then fight a big brain in order to get a proper finish. However, it just so happens that for one very small and very specific window of time, all of these big bads happen to be in the same place at the same time. And on the heels of that wonderful coincidence, now is probably the time to mention the challenge run's true hero. Everyone's favorite wizard, Gale.
Hello.
You see, Gale tried to hook up with a particularly crazy chick back in the day, and long story short, he ended up with a bomb in his chest that explodes if he doesn't eat magical items. However, even with as much as I'd been using food on this playthrough, I hadn't really been feeding Gale his medicine, and he was set to burst. So, to bring this run to the credits, it was time to let Gale do his thing. All there was left to do was navigate through the secret passage under Moonrise and then let Gale misty step through a small gap that would allow him to sneak into Ketherick's lair. From there, it was a short elevator ride where the dead 3 were waiting, so I gathered my strength to say goodbye to Gale. It had taken 26 hours, over 200 food items, and almost 100 potions. But in one last flash of light, the Salami Challenge Run was done. If you want to see me beating my meat more often, nope, that's probably not the one to use, huh? If you have any cool ideas for other challenge runs that you want to see me try, and or you want to congratulate me for having the best meat, make sure to leave it in the comments. Like and subscribe. That's me gripping a big salami for you.